Hi everyone, welcome back to the Dish on Aging. Today is Tuesday, June 29th, 2021, and today's topic is what is the latest news about sexuality in late life? This is episode 26. One of the reasons why I selected this topic was because actually the topic was suggested by somebody I was talking to during the week, just to put out general information about sexuality and aging. And as I was going through my email, I said, oh, look at here. And I'm saying in my own head, there's a new special issue that has come out on this, one of the journals I receive every month, coming out on this topic. And then this past week, I went to go locate the journal. The journal is called The Gerontologist. And then what I quickly realized is that the journal hasn't been published yet. This is a request has been made for a special issue that will be published sometime, hopefully in the next year, on the topic of sexuality and aging. It is because of that I'm actually going to start a part 1, part 2, part 3, and so on series on sexuality and aging, and this will be part 1 today. One of the reasons why I want to do that is because I conducted a literature search, something I do from time to time to get the latest information about a topic related to aging, and I learned so much new information about how important this topic is. There is not a whole lot of research on it, and within the last year or two there has been a huge interest in research and better understanding sex and sexuality throughout the lifespan, especially the later decades of life. So I want to share with you in today's presentation what I learned this past week, because I learned a lot. It's unbelievable with my doctorate in clinical psychology and then with postdoctoral training in geriatrics that I didn't know a lot of this information. One of the first things that comes up that the gerontologist advertisement for looking for scholarly submissions on the topic is that, I'm going to read right directly from this, sexual intimacy, experiences, sexual identity, and behavior are important for well-being and overall health across the lifespan. And even though there is some research about sexuality in what's called late midlife, which is about age 50, and then into, I want to find out what word they use, and later life. So we're talking about sexuality, sexual expression, sexual experience, sexual perceptions on into 80th and 90th decades of life. But there's so much that's not understood about sexuality in these age groups and how it might be similar or different than at other decades of life. And also, for some reason, there's been interest in scholarly research on these topics. I have an idea why I think that is. And I think it has to do with baby boomers and the sexual revolution. Okay, let's see. One of the most important aspects of aging and sexuality is that there are significant misconceptions about sexuality, when in reality, and not only just misconceptions, but negative stereotypes about sex and aging. And one of the things that surveys have always demonstrated is that most people age 50 and older, so 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, will endorse that sexuality is something that is of interest and of importance to them. And so the aging population groups identify this as a very, very important topic for them. When we're talking about sexuality, we have to look at a couple of different things: psychological and relational aspects of sexuality. And that includes personal meaning and understanding of sex. And also, when we're researching aging and sex, sometimes being in a committed relationship is a big part of that, which brings me right into generation gap. One of the topics that was presented in the Gerontological Society of America conference in November of 2019. I was at that conference, and I don't know how I missed this presentation. It was a paper about research looking at the differences in attitude and expressions of sexuality between the traditionalist generation and the baby boomers. And it was just one study, but it did start to show we are seeing differences in attitudes, differences in action, differences in behavior, in sexual expression between the traditionalist age group and the baby boomers. And I'm going to put up a chart because I actually clearly had to write out for myself the different generations. So when we're talking about sexuality across the lifespan, something that is very important is the personal meaning and how somebody understands sex. That is going to be a biological, it is going to be a psychological, and it's also going to be sociological. So our generational thinking about sex, sexual expression, and sex and aging is going to be greatly influenced by the generation that we grew up in. And again, I've talked about generations. You can have somebody from your same generation, your same sort of life experiences, and you may think very different than somebody who is your own age. But the reality is there can be very different concepts in terms of values and how to think about sex in aging depending on what generation somebody belongs to. So this particular study looked at the traditionalists. Traditionalists are going to be those born, or also called the silent generation, those born 1945 and earlier, so generally age 75 and older. And they compared that to the baby boomers, so that means people born age 1946 to 1964, so basically age 57 to 75. And they did find differences. I had to decide if I was going to talk about those differences in this video. I decided not to because it was a small study. It was only one study, and the whole point of the study was just to look at, are there differences in generation in terms of how sex and sexuality is viewed, and how, if it's even valued as important as we get older. And there were generational differences. I will tell you the biggest difference between the baby boomers and the generalists, or the traditionalists. The traditionalists generally were only expressing sexuality if they were in part of a couple, and the baby boomers, and I don't know how couple was defined. Is that specific a traditional marriage? And I have a feeling it very well may have been. Whereas the baby boomers are going to be less concerned about committed relationship or marriage when being sexually active. Also, there were some differences in terms of how medical conditions interacted with sexual expression. And there was another study I was looking at. It was actually a qualitative review. And I'm going to put, as I go through and edit, I'm going to identify the research articles that I looked at and that are contributing to my understanding and the information that I'm presenting today. just because I come from a scholarly background and I'm used to if I were to be writing this up as a paper, I would be giving you the references. So one of the references that I looked at was actually a really nice paper published in 2018, and it was a qualitative review of everything. It's called Sexual Aging, a systematic review of qualitative research on sexuality and sexual health in older adulthood. And so this article reviewed all the other qualitative articles that had been published about aging and sexuality. And some themes came out. One of the biggest themes is how very much sexuality, how somebody thinks about sex, and also how somebody maybe acts sexually is very much influenced by social, cultural factors, and in ways we don't understand. These are just initial qualitative research studies. The other aspect that is important when we are talking about aging and sexuality is how we define sexuality. And I will come back. I can't wait to hear what Gamma S has to say about this topic. So I want to take a break here. Let's hear what Gamma S has to say, and then I will come back with definitions of sexuality, what activities are included under sexuality, and then I will talk about some of the trends that came up, trends in qualitative research. Sometimes qualitative research is used just to get some ideas on where to start with quantitative, so a larger study, as we're trying to understand this behavior. So I'll talk about, this was actually a pretty comprehensive qualitative review, and so a number of trends came out, but I'll pull maybe 3 or 4 of what I think are the most important trends from that study. So let's hear what Gamma S has to say about the topic. Hi Gamma, how are you?
Hi everyone, Gamma S here. I'm so glad we're talking about this topic, sex and aging. I agree with what Dr. Sweeney said, that sex, sexuality, sexual expression is such an important part of being healthy physically and emotionally and socially throughout life. I also really like that this is sort of getting away from ageism, and we are looking at at least starting to look at aging and sex as something that is important. Ageism would say people get older, and they would think of sex as people get older as a pejorative. That is partly an expression of ageism. So it supports healthy aging to start valuing sex as we get older and to look at the wide variety of topics related to sex and relationships and getting older. The second most important point I want to make, and I don't know if Dr. Sweeney has thought to talk about this, and that is safe sex. Something that has come up over the years is that very high rates of sexually transmitted diseases, including HIV, with retired men who go to receive the services of a prostitute, and it's even specific to the state of Florida. So this has been a challenge in geriatrics over the last 15 years. So keep in mind, as we're talking about sex and aging, that any conversations that you've had with your children or grandchildren about the importance of safer sex, please remember to apply those concepts to aging seniors who are sexually active. Okay, that's my 2 cents. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Gamma. I always look forward to Gamma's perspective because she sees things from a different view than I think most people will see things. And she's exactly right. For us to be talking about aging and sex, it is anti-ageism. And anti-ageism is a good thing. Also, the topic about to keep in mind concepts of safer sex absolutely need to be applied to the aging population. There has been some research that shows that older adults are happy to be learning about and apply safer sex concepts in their life, but many of them may not have had access to the information. When you're in a public high school, you are required to sit through a sexual education class, and maybe we need to start thinking about that for seniors as well, and also every age group, not just seniors. So keep that in mind. Sexually transmitted diseases do not discriminate based on age. Just because the world thinks that older adults are not sexually active doesn't mean that they are immune to exposure to and getting sexually transmitted diseases. So keep in mind the concept of safer sex. So thank you so much, Gamma. Something else I want to bring up that I learned this week about the pandemic, the COVID-19. There's a lot of talk now about variant Delta, which I think is the Greek alphabet D, and that if you've been vaccinated, as long as you're wearing your mask, you're fine. And there's a lot of people who have, throughout the country, who've chosen not to be vaccinated, and they may be facing challenges, but they have to make their own decision about that. Also, the children younger than age 12 do not have the option of getting vaccinated because the vaccinations are not yet available for that age group. What I want to talk about, anybody who knows, I think it's Greek, what comes after Delta? Gamma. Gamma is the next alphabet, Greek alphabet. So we now have some talk in the media about COVID-19 variant called Gamma. I had to make sure my microphone is on. Here, I have to check something. Just a minute. Okay, so I might be coming in with better audio now that I have my microphone on. So the next variant after Delta is called Gamma. When Gamma S came up with her name, she was not thinking about the Greek alphabet. She was thinking Gamma as a derivation of the word grandma. So Gamma instead of grandma. So I wanted to just explain that to everyone because you're going to be hearing, you might in the next few weeks be hearing all kinds of information about the Gamma COVID-19 variant, and has nothing to do with, of course, my character friend Gamma S. Okay, so back to the topic. The topic about, we're talking about aging and sex and sexuality. What I want to talk about now is the World Health Organization talking about this topic in 2006. And what they said, this is actually a definition. Sexuality is reflected in specific individual behaviors, fantasies, desires, beliefs, attitudes, values, practices, roles and relationships perceived as sexual. And this can be sexual intercourse, kissing, hugging, touching, flirting, acts of bodily and or emotional intimacy. So also they go on to talk about, the World Health Organization does, that sexual activities, behaviors are different depending on what a person's perceptions are of what is sexual and based on complex social, economic, and political factors. this review from 2018 on sexual aging. The authors are, one is based in University of Zagreb, and I think that's Croatia. The other one is University of Southampton, which is in Great Britain. And so this is looks at aging. When they did the literature review, it was worldwide aging. So they're looking at just what our views about sex and relationships anyway can vary very dramatically, culture to culture, region of the world. So that's just going to be where we're starting as a baseline. When then we're looking at how does sexuality, sexual expression, sexual views change with aging? And as I mentioned in the first segment, it changes according to what is your generation? What generation are you a part of? Also, a big part of sexual expression and aging is how do you view? What are your own views on sexuality and aging? And by and large, things to remember is that being sexual in older adulthood is defined as an indicator of a successful aging. With that being said, I don't want anybody to think they are unsuccessful or otherwise a failure if they are not sexually active. Because one of the main reasons why somebody may not be sexually active is because they don't currently have a partner, and they're being smart about not just engaging in a hookup or a one night stand. That's going to be very important for medical health. So, but for those who are able to be sexually active, and keep in mind my definition of sexual activity, some of the research is showing with couples, if there has been a medical challenge where the couple may not be able to engage in sexual intercourse, many couples report they are actually very happy with cuddling or other types of sexual experiences that they engage in as part of sexual intimacy, and they find that very satisfying even if they're not having sexual intercourse. So that's important to understand. Also, a lot of this qualitative research is showing that it's not so much whether or not the aging individual is sexually active or not. It is how do they understand or perceive if they're not being sexually active? Are they okay with that, or do they find that distressing? And that's kind of where somebody's not sexually active and they're very distressed by that, then that's going to impact into a poor quality of life. If somebody is not sexually active and they're comfortable with it, even though in an ideal world they would want to be sexually active, but they've accepted or they're okay with the fact that they're not sexually active, that's not going to have a negative impact on their quality of life. And men and women may have different views of that. Some of the stereotypes, if you will, that come out are more positive, and they're also anti-ageist, so that makes it good. And that means the active sexual life of the older adult creates almost a stereotype of a sexy oldie. And we'll see that in the media now. And it's a double-edged sword. Generally, it's not a bad thing. It's anti-ageist. But sometimes it can send the expectation that every senior is going to be sexually active, and that may not be the case. And so we don't want to set up an expectation that to be healthy you have to be sexually active. And also it goes on to talk about, oh yeah, here we are. Rates of sexually transmitted diseases have also been rising in the older adult population. Not surprised to hear that. Okay, other trends that come up. There's a negative stereotype about aging women and sexuality. Women can be judged, and it's a pejorative judgment if they are older and sexually active. And so one of the writers talks about how women can be, viewed in a ageist and a sexist way at the same time when it comes to sexual activity as they get older. And I have seen that in my own work. Somebody will say, "Oh yeah, I'm out there, and I've been widowed for a couple of years now, and I want to be dating and possibly married again." And her friends like say, "Oh, you're too flirtatious," or whatever it is, and that's a pejorative. That's ageism. No, what she is healthy. That is healthy what she is doing. She has an interest in a romantic relationship, sexual intimacy, potentially marriage. That's healthy and should be lifted up and not criticized. Also, a big part of relationships and sexuality is going to be health. To be healthy emotionally and to be in healthy relationships. That is going to be very important. Also, this research study talks about how aging has changes in the biology that can impact sex, particularly with women. And also, aging can be associated with cancer diagnoses of the sexual organs, which then can potentially impact sexual functioning. Some of the trends in the qualitative research look at if somebody goes through particularly a cancer treatment, how does that impact sexual functioning, and is it perceived the lack if they're not having sexual activity anymore, is that perceived as a contributing to a poor quality of life? And what the research is showing is that for some individuals, if they may say to themselves, I'm not no longer sexually active, but I'm 93. I'm okay with that. So in other words, appreciating and this is the coping, appreciating because they're older, they're not going to be sexually active. We have to challenge that thought. Because some of the research is showing that in the last several decades, there is a lot more available in terms of treatments. For men, the Viagra, for the women, the hormone replacement treatments. If there's something about the biology of the aging process that's interfering with a satisfying sexual relationship, it can be important to reach out to your healthcare provider to initiate a conversation about that, because there may be medical treatments. And that is going to be true if it's going to be an age-related biological or medical reason that sex is not as satisfying, or if it was a treatment, particularly a cancer treatment or another medical challenge, to have somebody has an interest in a sexual relationship or resuming sexual activity and just medically it's just not working. Talk to your medical doctor, because there may be treatments, things that can be done. The important focus here is keeping in mind that sex and sexual activity is important and it does matter. And that is separate from aging. There are going to be reasons why seniors are reluctant to have this conversation with their doctor. First of all, their doctors, and particularly the research is showing, I didn't say this, the research is, if the doctors are younger, the patient's going to be more hesitant to bring up the conversation. Also for women, if the doctor is younger and male, they're going to be reluctant to bring up the conversation. So many of us now in the healthcare system, we have more than one healthcare provider, so we have our choice. If we want to find out more information so that we can have more satisfying expression of our sexual selves, decide which healthcare provider you feel comfortable asking about what can be done to help with that, because it's very important for emotional and quality of life, and just emotionally it's important. Okay, so that is an overall summary of so much about aging and sexuality. What I learned when I did this literature review, a very quick literature review this past week, is that there's a lot more out there and there's more information to come. The biggest take-homes that I learned is that how people think about sex is related to the generation they're from. And also, most seniors identify an interest in sex and sexual activity and attribute it to quality of life. And so that has to be looked at and examined. Um, so those are the two most important things. Also, the third is the medical treatments that are out there. If somebody wants to continue to be sexually active and they're having problems, the importance of talking with their medical doctor about that to perhaps getting a solution to the problem. And that is important to do because sex is important at every age. So those are the three take homes. Also, part of this sex and aging has to do with it's also sex also has to do with sexual orientation, acceptance, and gender identification. We're hearing a lot in the news about transgender, and it is a little bit. It shouldn't be comical to me, but it is a little bit. Because it's a generational difference. Some seniors are going into the doctor's office, and the first question that's being asked is, which pronouns do you prefer to be addressed by? And some people being asked that question, I can tell you, are getting a tirade rant back about how this question is absolutely ridiculous. And to be asking a woman in an obstetrician's office, what gender would you like to be identified as? But this is related to aging, transgender, and how it is because somebody might have identified their entire life as being a gender other than what they had lived their life for, but now society is changing. So they may be in their 50s, 60s, 70s, or older, and now they can consider the possibility of transitioning gender, as of course Caitlyn Jenner did. Um, and so this is going to be a part of aging as well. And as a geriatric psychologist, I've had to learn about that. I would think of myself as not being a marriage counselor, not being a sex therapist. These are concepts I don't need to know about. But it very much is a geriatric concept. Oh, also, the research shows that as people get older, they start to become more comfortable with sexual expressions. Um, Also, some people report that they have more satisfaction with sex as they get older. And also, don't think that people lose out on quality of experience of sex, particularly women past menopause. All of the research that's being done is saying that's complete baloney. Some people report some of the best sex of their life as they get older. So that's all the positive. And I'm going to make this now almost like a series. This is part one. Because there's more information, more research coming out on this topic, and I think it's important to talk about because it addresses this theme of generation gap, generational differences in thinking that I've been talking about in this video series, The Dish on Aging. But it also is an anti-aging topic. It's important we talk about sex when we're talking about aging because both are important. Okay, thank you very much. I will see you next week where I will talk about why can't I actually am changing the topic a little bit. On July 6th, it'll be episode 27. And the topic was, why can't my granddaughter find a qualified psychologist to talk to? I've changed that topic. It's going to be, why can't my granddaughter slash grandfather find a qualified psychologist to talk to? So that's basically Medicare provider versus not Medicare provider. I woke up yesterday. The three top emails in my inbox were, Dr. Sweeney, we have a job for you. I'm not even looking. I mean, that's how much there is a demand for mental health providers right now. And that's never happened in my career. Usually, if I'm looking for a job, I'll receive an email about one, but I'm not even looking. And I had three separate employers reaching out to me to come work for them. So that's part of the reason why it's hard to find a qualified psychologist to talk to, but I'll be talking about that next week, July 6th. Also, I have my July 2021 topics. July 13th, I'll be talking about what are some important demographics to know related to aging. On July 20th, I will be talking about what to do when a loss creates more than a need to emotionally grieve, but also a need to redefine your purpose in life. I was talking with somebody about this recently, and they said, but I'm 70 years old. I'm too old to find a new purpose in my life. And I said, well, no, not really. And this is actually coming up as a standard, how can I say, challenge that people are finding in life where they've had a loss. And it was something that defined who they were. And so now they have to redefine themselves. So I'll be talking about that more in more detail on July 20th. July 27th, I'll be talking about how to fall back on your values to help you live well through hardship. And that's going to have to do with setting priorities to help you navigate the best path for yourself. And August 3rd, I'm going to do part 2 of today's presentation. What is the latest news about sexuality in late life, part 2. That'll be August 3rd. And then August 10th, I'm going to be talking about what does caregiver anger look like and when to know when it's time to jump ship. I've seen this past year, not because of the pandemic, I'm going to say the last year or two. I think it has to do with the baby boomers, the baby boomer generation transitioning into aging and also Medicare health insurance. I'm seeing new trends in the clinical work that I am providing. I'm seeing and I'm hearing about it and I'm reading about it relating to geriatrics and aging care. And one of them is caregivers just not emotionally being prepared for the job and just walking out of marriages. And I did not see this 15 years ago with the World War II generation. And that was probably because the World War II generation had a lot more family support. And caregivers now are usually, it's just them, nobody else is available, quite literally, to help with the tasks. And they're getting angry, resentful, overwhelmed, and saying, okay, I'm not up for this, I need a divorce. So either that or they're staying, even worse, they're staying in the marriage and just walking around very angry and becoming verbally abusive. And this is different than caregiver burnout. And I'll talk about why that is on August 10th. So those are going to be the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks ahead. And I look forward to putting these presentations together because I am learning a whole lot as I think about these topics and sometimes have to do research to see where we are with the latest information. Okay, have a great weekend, everyone. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.